talk now to Shehata and get his thoughts on all of this. He is Assistant Professor of Arab Politics at Georgetown University. Professor Shehata, the military leadership, no doubt under increasing pressure to set a timetable for the presidential elections, but they're now saying that, first of all, the constitution needs to be rewritten and approved in a referendum. How seriously will this delay the whole political process leading to these presidential elections?
Well, you know, some of the leading presidential candidates had met several weeks ago to really push the Supreme Council to put a timetable in place when presidential elections would be held. And they had asked that presidential elections would be held in February or March. But certainly now, with the timetable that we've seen, it looks like presidential elections at the very earliest will take place in the really end of 2012.
So this could delay the process by about a year. And the council itself, when it first took control of Egypt, had said that the military council would hand power to civilian rule within 6 months. So will this new timetable satisfy anyone, certainly among the opposition?
Well, the primary point of the meeting that the opposition parties had with the Supreme Council yesterday wasn't so much the timetable for the presidential elections, was to reform amend the electoral law, which only allowed political parties to run for 2/3 of the seats and reserved 1/3 of the seats for independent candidates. And as your piece mentioned, the fear was remnants of the old regime would gain those seats and would then have a presence in parliament. So the primary reason that the opposition parties met with the Supreme Council was to change that issue, as well as things like establish a timetable, possibly entertain a law that would ban former corrupt officials from participating in politics for 2 years or 10 years, certainly ending the state of emergency, which is another demand that they have. So all of those issues were on the table, and they got some good signals from the Supreme Council about amending the electoral law so that political parties could compete for all of the seats, as well as the end of the military trials and some other things. But you're certainly right. It does look like, unfortunately, that the Supreme Council, the men in uniform, are going to be running the country essentially for more time than many of us wanted.
And the fact that the military council will be running the country for longer than most people wanted, the fact that it hasn't lived up to its pledge of returning the country to civilian rule within 6 months, that it hasn't put an end to military trials for civilians, that the Mubarak era emergency laws are still in place. How much will all of this affect people's trust in this Supreme Council?
Well, there's no question that from February 11th, the time that Mr. Mubarak was removed from power, until the present, the Supreme Council's standing in the eyes of the revolutionaries, of sincere Democrats and so on, has plummeted for all of the reasons that you've mentioned. And it's not clear at all that they are sincerely committed, let alone understand what democracy is, for all different kinds of reasons. They have vested economic interests at place. We have to remember that all of the members of the Supreme Council were appointed and were members of the Mubarak regime. And so I think there's a consensus emerging that they really got rid of Mubarak to save themselves. And now they're trying to negotiate with the political groups and so on to see what the future would be like. So the struggle is going to continue, and I think people are pressing for full democracy, and the Supreme Council is seen by many as an obstacle to that.
Professor Shehata of Georgetown University, thanks so much. And still ahead on the program,